Hello, everyone, and welcome to Our Voices, the podcast for straight partners and partners of trans people by Our Path. I'm your host, Kristen Kelbley. Our guest today is Christine, and I want to make a note we're using a pseudonym for Christine because minors are involved. Christine is a mother of two, a business consultant, a community advocate, and has volunteered for straight spouse support organizations. Her husband came out as gay in 2018, and her assigned male at birth older child came out as a trans female in 2023. Welcome to the podcast, Christine. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
And we are using pseudonyms to protect the innocent and not so innocent. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, because minors are involved. So.
Minors involved. Well, today's podcast is a bit of a special topic, and this was actually your idea. So I want to give you credit for that. And I think it's a great idea, which is why you proposed the idea. And I said, well, why don't you come on and talk about that? And it's the idea of when you are a straight spouse who's been married to somebody who is LGBT, but then also your kid comes out as LGBT, because a lot of straight spouses have LGBT kids. And there's this like cognitive dissonance and complicated experience that you go through. And I don't have kids, which is why you're here to talk about it. When you have both of these experiences at the same time, is that fair to say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because certainly the reactions are very different. And so there's one that causes a lot of pain and one where, you're shocked in a different way, but you kind of have to go into support mode.
Yeah. So, well, and I know that a lot of parents out there have experienced this, and we're going to talk about too, like kind of the challenges of Pride Month, and we're right in the middle of June, and it's like, there's a set of feelings connected with your spouse coming out when we experience Pride Month, and then there's a different set of feelings perhaps when your child is LGBT during Pride Month. So we'll get into all of that. But first, I think we have to talk at least a little bit in broad strokes about your straight spouse experience so that people can kind of understand why you even came to be a quote unquote, as we identify ourselves, straight spouse.
My husband and I thought we were always very happily married. We got along well. We co-parented well. We laughed a lot together. And I was really surprised when all of a sudden he asked for a divorce in 2018.
How long were you guys married at that point, and how old were your kids at that point?
We had been married. We'd been together 15 years. We'd been married for 13.
Okay.
And the kids were 11 and 12, I guess. When they came out, but they were like 10 and 11. I don't know. Maybe I have to think about this. Okay, go. The kids were 10 and 12, and we'd been married about 13 years at that point. Mm-hmm. And I thought that we were happy. We got along well. We joked together. We co-parented well together. We still had great sex. But it just was less and less frequent. And he was more and more unhappy and drinking a lot. And finally, one day he asked me for a divorce and couldn't really name why.
What was your response when he asked for a divorce?
Well, I was shocked because we got along so well and co-parented so well and, seemed happy. We'd been getting a little more distant. I had found a note that he had written with his therapist about reasons to divorce Christine and reasons to stay together, which in 2017, which really shocked me. And it had things on the list like pros, she's beautiful and she's smart and she's a good mother and has nice boobs or something like that. And cons were things like she reads People magazine.
Okay.
And it was sort of a ridiculous list. But one of the things on the pro list was she has hot friends. And so I was really upset at the time and thinking, okay, I started eyeing my friends, like which one of them does he have a crush on? Which, what is happening? Are they flirting with him? And I was
you thought
really
these were your women friends?
Yes.
That
absolutely.
He was referring to. Okay, got it.
Yes. And it was only much later that he said, oh, no, I was talking about the guys.
Wow. Okay.
So he had started kind of realizing we had a gay couple friends that were kind of flirty with him. And it was sort of a big joke to all of us, because I told one of them, I think you're gorgeous, but I can never have you, and you can never have my husband. Ha ha ha.
Mm,
Because, we always were sort of joking around like this. Um, and my husband was like, well, why would you be attracted to me anyway? And I'm kind of fat and hairy. And he said, well, you're a bear. And he's like, there's a name for what I am. And I sort of saw his eyes light up that he was flattered by this man being attracted to him.
mm,
And our high school reunion was approaching, and he was looking through a yearbook, and he realized that his dedication page was really all about his friend. And he said, again, this is later, but he said, looking at this, I realized I didn't admire him. I had a crush on him, but I didn't really have a name for what that was at the time.
mm,
So his coming out process was very, very gradual.
mhm,
And, he had inklings when he was younger, but he also is very much attracted to women.
mm,
He identifies as bisexual now and mostly dates women, actually. Um,
mm,
but he realized he had a lot of attraction to men and that he wanted to act on it. But he reached a point of he was ready to kill himself rather than come out as gay because he was so afraid of breaking up the family. So he made up an excuse for why we were divorcing, and so he complained about. He said, "Well, it's because you nag me about how I load the dishwasher," and I said,
mm.
"I have never said a word about how you load the dishwasher." Um, and so something made me, because he, kind of had this flirtation with the neighbor, and he'd recognized by then that he had a crush on his high school friend. I said, "Do you think maybe the reason you're so unhappy is because you're gay?" And he said, "Yeah, I think I am." And my reaction to him coming out was, "Yes, yay, we solved it." And this is not
Mm,
most straight spouses' reaction, right?
right. Yeah.
But my reaction was, "Oh, yay, we figured out why you're unhappy. Now we can, figure out if we're going to open the relationship, if you're going to have some, exploration." I was relieved.
Yeah.
And it didn't really dawn on me that, oh, this might mean the end of my marriage, for a while. So at first it was relief, and
Okay.
the grief came much later.
That isn't the response necessarily of most or maybe many straight spouses. We don't really know. But I can relate to that in that there was a window of time when in my own marriage, I was like, please just let him be gay. And I would have been
Mm-hmm.
relieved had he come out at that point. So, which of course he didn't. So, I do understand that reaction for sure. So you ask him if it's because he could be gay. He says, yes, I think it's possible that that's the case. And then at what point did you realize this was going to be the end of your marriage?
Um, well, we thought we would stay married and maybe just make some rules for how he could experiment with men or something. I wanted him to be able to figure that out. But pretty quickly, I started thinking about it and realizing this isn't the marriage I signed up for. I wanted a heterosexual, monogamous partnership.
Mm.
And I want somebody who wants me 100%, and I want him 100%. And I'm not good at sharing. I don't share my toys in the sandbox. Um,
Right.
so I realized pretty quickly that it wasn't going to work for me.
Hmm.
So it took about 5 months before we realized we need to renegotiate the deal. So
Hmm.
he moved out, and we told our kids right around that time,
Okay.
and because we had to explain why dad was going to be living somewhere else.
And what did you say to the kids? Were you open and honest, or did you kind of age appropriate? How did you do that?
Well, the advice of a therapist was don't tell the children that the parent is gay, because then they will blame them and then they will not like gay people. And so we just said, we feel like we'll be a better mommy and daddy apart.
Mm.
And my younger child just immediately started wailing and just said, no, 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 no. You're so good together. You get along great. You're good mommy and daddy. Why would you need to be apart? And so we just looked at each other like, okay, we got to tell him. So we said, well, actually, dad has come to realize that he is gay. and we want him to be his fully actualized self and have the partnership that he needs, and mommy needs to have the partnership that she deserves. And my younger kid immediately calmed down, and
Wow.
instead of being more shocked, he just said, "Oh, okay, we get it. We get that that's why you can't be together."
Isn't that fascinating? Like, I just have to say, like, when you told me that was the therapist's advice, I was a little bit like, what? Because kids, the truth is everything. And they need we all need the truth in order to be living truthful lives. And so it's interesting to me that the therapist would say that. I mean, how do you feel about that advice from the therapist looking back?
I thought it was terrible at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I believe in honesty, and kids are marvelous BS detectors.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was very much in protective mode of my
Yeah.
husband. I didn't want the kids to be mad at him for being gay or not like gay people. We have a ton of gay and lesbian friends. I didn't want them to view that as upsetting them. And the other thing is that my younger child at one point had said that he thought he might be gay when he was like 7 or 8.
Mm,
And so I thought, well, they're going into puberty now. Are they going to think this is when I turn gay? Or
mm,
if I'm gay, mom's going to kick me out of the house.
mhm.
So I thought it was good from that perspective. I didn't want my child, this is so funny now. I didn't want, if my younger kid did turn out to be gay, I didn't want him to think being gay means mom kicks you out of the house or something. I don't know what association I
Right.
thought they were going
Yeah.
to make.
Yeah.
But what was interesting is my older child, that we're calling just A,
Mhm.
um, he, and I have his permission, I use male pronouns for past stuff, but
Mhm.
I'm trying to be pretty good about she now. Anyway, so he was in middle school in 6th grade, and he had joined the Rainbow Alliance at school that was supposed to be for LGBT kids and their allies.
Was this
And
before or after dad came out? Or you told
the,
the kids this
this
before?
is before. This
Okay,
is
before.
before.
So
Yeah.
the oldest child joined the Rainbow Alliance at school. Okay.
Joined the Rainbow Alliance in middle school and wanted to be an ally for the LGBT kids at school. And so the whole time he took this news very calmly. Mom and dad are divorcing. Okay. And then so I said, well, it's because dad's gay. And the younger kid went, oh, okay, cool. That
Mhm.
makes sense then. We understand why you need to be apart. A then got upset and said, what? No, now everybody's going to think I'm in the Rainbow Alliance just for my dad.
Mm.
And so that's one of those things that looking back is like, okay, maybe there was something going on there. That was a little more of a reaction than, gosh, now people aren't going to think I'm just a good ally. They're going to think it's because of my dad and not because of
Right.
something I want to do. So that was kind of one of our first little clues.
Got it. So, and let's just stay on the marriage for just a little bit to just sort of close that chapter or wind that chapter up. So you tell the kids, you tell them the truth, and then how does the divorce sort of unfold from there? Does it become amicable? Does it become strained? Did you ever get angry at some point? Or, I know that the initial reaction was one of relief. Did that ever change for you?
When the pandemic hit, I got very
Mm,
mad
okay.
because I was absolutely convinced that I was going to die alone in my house and
Mm,
turn
mm,
into insect food, and no one would find me because it would be on a week that I didn't have my kids and he wasn't around. And I found myself then really going through the grief. So I showed up at my first RPATH meeting 4 days after he came out. I knew about the
mm,
organization, and so I showed up just all like sunny and bright, thinking like we're going to build a float for Pride Parade or something. Well, the straight
mm.
spouses, I really saw us as allies. Um, and it really took me a while to absorb the pain of it. So I got mad during the pandemic, and grief comes in waves, and so you have those moments. We've been mostly amicable, sometimes very definitely not very hostile. Overall, we still co-parent pretty well, but that's about the extent of our relationship at this point.
And when you had the anger, was it when the anger finally came on, was it because, you mentioned like there was this fear there that you were going to die alone. And did that like come from a thing of like, my marriage blew up because of this? Like, let me just be direct. Like, were you blaming him on some level or holding him responsible on some level for not ever telling you that this was his sexuality? Yeah.
Yeah. Because the thing is, he grew up, his mom's best friend was a lesbian. Mm-hmm. And he grew up in a pretty liberal family. And so I saw it as, you had every reason, every ability to come out. Mm-hmm. You could have figured this out by now. And so why did you drag me through this? But I feel sad and lost because I feel like I'm going to grow old alone. And that's where I'm sad. But I don't regret our relationship because of our kids. Our kids are awesome. Gotcha. And he was a good husband. He was a good partner. He was the one getting up to change the diapers in the night and has always been very supportive. And I've been very, very lucky in a few ways in that he recognizes, I'm sorry I did this to you. So I will support you. And until the kids are out of the house, I want you to be able to be a stay-at-home mom and be around them as much as possible. You can keep the house. I'm not going to fight you on this, that, or the other. You can, we're still business partners together. So, I was very lucky in that way. And the other way that was lucky was he gave me permission to tell anyone and everyone I wanted except his family. So I came out for him.
Really? Not his, I mean, if he grew up in sort of a progressive liberal family, it's interesting that he said, no, don't tell them.
Oh, just because it was his information to share.
Oh, I see. Okay. Not because he was hiding it, but because he wanted to do that. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So he came out in March. I immediately started telling friends. And then I realized that was sort of a bad idea because I was doing the work for him. He wasn't having to process saying over and over, I'm gay. This is who I am, and dealing with it. But I was the one that would tell our friends, even in his company, or tell some other friends. But at least I had support. So my closet was pretty short in terms of when, feeling like I can't tell anyone. But we did not tell our families until right before we told the kids, because we didn't want something to slip to the children. So.
Right. Okay, so is there anything else before we move on to your experience with your children coming out or coming out? Is there anything else you feel like is important for us to know about the marriage before we pivot to the next chapter?
No, that's about it. Okay. Like I said, it was easy for me in a lot of ways. But with that, telling everyone, of course, you get those questions of, well, did you know? Were there any signs?
Yes, the question. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what they're really asking is, what was happening in the bedroom,
Mm-hmm.
But you get those questions about, like, did you know? Did you have any signs? And I told, no, I had no idea, or I wouldn't have married him. And even our gay friends, even the one that was so flirty with him was like, what? I did not see that coming. He did not set off my gaydar. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting, because I would have thought that if they're flirting with him, it's because they have, the spider senses are going off, ding, 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 and that's interesting that the friend said no. That they didn't.
One or two said, we kind of figured. And what was interesting is, like, there was, but I don't know what would set off their spidey sense. Seriously. Yeah. All of our friends, including the gay ones, were generally shocked. But I do remember a time or two being at a restaurant and one time at a gay bar, and we had a gay waiter that was a little flirty with him too. And I was like, what is going on there? Like, why is he flirting with you right in front of me? Does he know something I don't know? Which, looking back, is hilarious because they probably did. But when he came out, we got all the questions that happened. Like, did you know? Were there signs? No, there were no signs. No, I didn't see anything. It was just this kind of slow process of him sort of figuring himself out. And I know that sounds crazy to people because you know your sexuality pretty early on. But he is undiagnosed, but probably most likely on the autism spectrum, and doesn't quite relate to social cues, doesn't quite understand a lot of things, and has a hard time relating to feelings. He admitted that on our wedding day, he knew he was making a mistake, but he said, I thought that's how it was supposed to go because that's how it is on TV. The groom gets cold feet.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
he didn't really even connect that to his sexuality. And then asking him about it later, he said, I was already getting beaten up for so many things that I didn't want to admit that maybe I had a crush on a friend in middle school and get beaten up for being, quote, a fag too. So he was smart among a bunch of dumb kids. He was poor among a bunch of rich kids. He went to a boarding school, and he was Jewish among a lot of Baptists. And so he said, I was getting beaten up for, wearing hand-me-down clothes. I was getting beaten up for being, quote, a kike. At least the last thing I was going to do was be a kike fag.
So you mean physically beaten up?
Physically beaten up.
Okay. Wow. And so, okay. Wow. That's intense. I mean, that's intense.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, any feelings that he had, he suppressed it, or I think because of probably this neurodivergence aspect of things, he probably just thought, well, everybody feels this way. Everybody has feelings for boys and for girls.
Mm-hmm.
And he definitely likes girls, and he's only dated girls. So I think he thought, well, I'm obviously not gay because I like boobs. Like, I don't know how he justified it in his mind.
I mean, that's a little bit of a monkey in the, what do you call a monkey? A wrench? I don't know. A wrench in the works, yeah. A monkey in the whatever. Like that would, the boob thing is pretty classically heterosexual. So I don't know. I mean, it sounds like he identifies as bisexual now. Has he dated men since the divorce? Or that you know of?
Dated would be a broader term for his connections with men. We'll put it that way. Okay. He does not typically have emotional relationships. Okay. He's mostly, and I don't really know. Okay. And I don't really ask. His current situation is a little bit unknown. Once in a while we talk about it. He has been with men since we separated. He hooked up with a friend of mine, which was rough. He, with his AA sponsor, some poor decisions have been made. But for the most part, he dates women. And what's hard is I know at least one of them, he told the first woman that he dated after we separated, he told her that I cheated on him, and that's why we split up.
That is not uncommon. Yeah.
Yeah. It made me so mad, though. And I realized I can't worry about what she thinks of me, and he's going to create his own reality. I got to let go of that. But I really struggled with, do I tell her it's because he's gay? Do I tell her that he's had relationships with men? Because I don't think he's telling her. And I think that she deserved to know that. But I just left it alone.
Okay. So you didn't tell her?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. Do you still wonder about that? Like, do you still think that, I mean, there's no, this is not a moral judgment or anything, but does it still stay with you a little bit?
Telling her or not? Or the fact that?
Yeah, telling her.
So partly the reason I didn't is because our divorce wasn't final. I was very much financially tied into him. I didn't want to do anything to anger him. Right. And I also realized, if I don't know what he had told her or not. Okay. Like if they were on the verge of getting married or something, then I would probably pull her aside and go, by the way, has he ever mentioned? But I felt it wasn't my place to. I didn't want to poke the bear, let's say.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And
people come to different conclusions about that for different reasons. It's never a straightforward, it's a complex question.
I am always one for telling. I am always one for warning. But in this circumstance, I didn't have a personal connection with her. I didn't know her. And I didn't really even know how to connect with her. And the truth is, I didn't even know the extent of his contact with men, other than 2 or 3 people that I was aware of. Okay. So I didn't know how recent. I don't know what he tells women now. Yeah, but I do know that he dates mostly women. And he's had crushes on lesbians. He's dated bisexual women. It kind of runs the gamut.
Okay. So, I think we've, fairly covered that territory pretty generously. And thank you for sharing all of that. And so now let's pivot to we have this chapter in the past of having an LGBT spouse, and then your oldest comes out as trans. Is that correct? And tell us how all that happens.
Um, okay, yes. So she had been in the Rainbow Alliance in middle school. And then when she entered high school, she joined the Queer Student Alliance. And I thought it was just sort of a continuation. You're there as an ally for dad. Maybe because you still knew some of the kids you wanted to connect with. I didn't really think she was there for her at all, which just looking back seems a little naive. Um, but I noticed summer of 2022, we were in London during Pride, and there was a whole display of all the flags for everything. And I said something about, well, I don't know why we need a flag for demisexual, because that's just how relationships used to be. You would have to have an emotional connection before you had a physical connection. Am I getting that one right even, or is that the intellectual one? No, that's sapiosexual. Okay, carry on. So I was like, I don't know why we need a flag for demisexual, because that's just, how that doesn't seem fair to gender minority communities to suddenly lump in, and then here's what the standard was. So we were talking about the history of Pride, but she got really mad at me for saying that and said, you don't get to choose, who has what flag for what. You don't get to decide that. Everybody has to decide for themselves what flag makes sense to them or what they identify as. And I thought that was a bit of a strong reaction, but it kind of reminded me of when my husband had been sort of like kind of questioning things and realizing, maybe I am, maybe this was a crush, that kind of thing. And then I noticed that she started speaking in a little higher voice, and her nails were a little longer, and she's always been a very quiet child, and is on the autism spectrum. There is an incredibly high correlation with autism and being transgender. And I think that that's a little bit what's going on in this case. Her brain is just wired differently. But I had noticed a few things, and that she was speaking higher, that her nails were getting a little longer, things like that. And then I was like, oh, wait, why are you in the Queer Student Alliance? And so finally, one night, I asked her, and I just said, I noticed these things about you. I noticed you're wearing your hair a little longer, and you're presenting a little bit more feminine, not just your quiet self. And I wondered if you feel like you identify as trans. And it was just like waiting for that answer from my husband. There was a long pause. And then she said, yeah, I think I am. And it was the same words, Yeah, I think I am. And
just to clarify, this was in high school, and how old was A?
This was sophomore year in high school.
Okay. So about 15-ish.
They just turned 16.
Okay.
And so unlike, I asked my husband that question, do you think the reason you're unhappy is because you're gay? And yes, I think I am. And I felt relief. And then the grief came later. A tells me, yeah, I think I am. And I felt like I had killed my son. The grief was immediate. I felt like I could even tell you the date and time. I know to the minute when boy A died and girl A was born. And I was really profoundly sad right away. But then I realized, then the opposite happened. And then gradually it became relief, because I would rather have a live trans daughter than a dead son. And I was worried that was the point we were getting to.
Okay, couple questions here. So if you could describe that sadness, that grief, what would you say was the source of it? I mean, I've heard people say it's kind of like I'm mourning the loss of that daughter or son. Is that what it was for you? Or was it like, no, I don't want a trans kid, or no, I don't want, like, how did it go for you?
It was a little bit all of the above, because from the moment he was born, I had visions of how they would be as a father someday, and I wanted to be a grandmother. And so I felt like you're going to lose that. It was grief about the boy that I had known, the child that I had raised. But much like when she was diagnosed with autism, we realized pretty quickly we had to grieve the child we thought we had and get to know the child that we in fact had. So
Mhm.
it was a little bit that same thing. I had to let go of the child that I thought I had, that I thought was a boy, and welcome the child that is a girl. But there was also a lot of fear because there's so much, legislation and hate and just questions. And I thought, where are you going to go to the bathroom? Like, just even that is going to become a thing. And I didn't want her to have a difficult life. I didn't want her to be beaten up for who she is and for someone to not recognize how incredible this person is. And they're just bright and loving and such a gift to the world. And so I was really scared.
Mm.
So it was a little bit of everything. It was grief for the son and fear for the future and what that was going to look like.
Did A exhibit some suicidality, or was that something that you were afraid might happen or come to at some point?
I was afraid it might come to at some point, but I had noticed her having a lot more anxiety,
Hmm.
being a lot more withdrawn, starting to say things like the world is on fire and it's never getting better,
Hmm.
and generally things about the environment.
Hmm.
Um, but I just started noticing her talking about things in this kind of fatalistic way about how everything is difficult. There had been shootings at their school. And so, I thought, well, maybe the anxiety is kind of related to that. Um, there was just, there were signs that I felt like, okay, something's changing and it's not good. And so
Mm.
I need to release the pressure valve. And if I think my kid is trans, I need to give her permission to share that with me.
Right. So I want to take a moment here to pause that, we're well aware that, issues around youth transition, et cetera, are complicated and fraught and somewhat controversial. And that's not this podcast. And we're focusing on your reaction and experience as a spouse. And so you basically, and I think a lot of straight spouse parents will recognize the experience that you have to at some point make a decision. You have the experience and of your grief or your feelings around your child coming out as trans, and then you have to make a decision about how you're going to move forward with that child. And it sounds like you decided to move forward with affirming your child and their identity, and then and going forward from there. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
I said, I love you, I accept you. But honestly, one of my first thoughts was, please don't choose a name I hate. Please don't choose a name I hate.
I think I've heard from other parents, straight spouse parents who have kids who have come out as trans, that was just like, that name really? Yeah.
Yeah. So, but luckily, um, she has a name that's pretty gender neutral
Okay.
and is keeping it. And so
Okay.
I said, look, I've been Chris my whole life. There's boy Chris's, there's girl Chris's, and it's kind of cool. Have you thought about keeping it? And she said, yeah, I'm keeping it. This is who I am. So I was immediately very relieved that there, she wasn't
Right.
going to give me one more thing to, like, it's hard enough to get used to she, her, but
Right.
um, this was right after Christmas, and my sister has made my kids these custom tree ornaments every year with their names on them. And so it's so strange, but one of my first thoughts was, let me keep the Christmas ornaments. Like, I didn't want to have one for my younger son and then none for the older because she didn't want to see her name. So she
Right.
decided to keep, she decided to keep her name, which was a little bit of a blessing.
Right.
So,
I think that's like, and that's another common experience. I'm glad you brought it up because whether it's your spouse who's transitioning, as we've heard on this podcast before, or a child who's transitioning, sometimes they don't want reminders of who they were before. And so then, as a parent or spouse, you're grieving like family pictures being taken down, or in your case, family heirloom ornaments, that
Mm-hmm.
potentially might not have been allowed to stay. So I think that's a common experience that we've heard about before. Were you going to say one more thing? Yeah.
Well, so I just, I was relieved. I was sad, like I was everything at once, but it was sort of the mirror image of when my husband came out. But she was not ready to tell anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I was in the closet for quite a while.
Okay.
In fact, she's still not out to most people. We did finally tell the grandparents um, about a year later. Um, and she's out among friends at school, but not out to the broader public, which is part of the reason for the anonymity.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, her appearance is starting to change. She's growing her hair out. She started wearing, t-shirts with a V-neck instead of a crew neck, like little things.
Mm-hmm.
But she's not really out to most people. And initially she said, "Don't tell Dad." And
Really?
so
Why do you think that was?
I think she wanted to tell Dad in his own time, her own
Mm-hmm.
time when she was kind of ready. And so again, she wanted to share it herself. But I think almost when she said it out loud to me, it was because I asked. I don't think she was ready to come out to me. I think I
Mm-hmm.
kind of maybe pushed it a little,
Mm-hmm.
just because I'm very intuitive with how she was doing. So initially, we didn't tell Dad. And we did tell her brother. And so there was luckily it was a fairly short time, but there was about 6 weeks where we used a different set of pronouns when the kids are with me and a different set of pronouns when they were with Dad.
Mm-hmm.
And finally I said, this is getting weird. I'm going to slip up. You need to tell Dad. So she said, well, okay, I will. Okay. Today's the day I'm going to tell Dad. And it was our kid exchange day. And this is actually a funny story. So I said, okay, we'll sit down. I'll sit down with you. We'll come out to Dad. We'll explain. We'll see how he reacts. Well, it turns out in the meantime, we found out that some friends of my younger child uh, were had been smoking marijuana and eating edibles. And so I said, look, I don't want to be the bad cop, but we've got to talk to him about this and find out if he has been using anything, because these other parents are concerned. And, I just think this is responsible parenting, but I want you to initiate the conversation because, I'm usually the bad cop. So he
Mm-hmm.
said, yeah, fine. I'll bring it up sometime and I'll just say, hey, some of the parents and I have been talking. We know this is a time of experimentation. Have you used marijuana? And I was like, fine, cool, handle it. So I went to drop the kids off and they had decided, this is the day. So, I went in and I said, we need to talk to you about something. A has something very important to share with you. And, and he said, okay, but first, some of the parents and I have been talking, and we know kids are experimenting with marijuana. And I was looking at him going, not now, not now, not now.
This is not it.
Of course, he's completely missing the cues. And so he goes on and I'll ask the kids, have you tried marijuana? And the kids are like, no. So A is like, what are you talking about? And she desperately wants to be able to talk about this other thing. And my other kid goes, no, why? He's suddenly getting a little nervous. And I said, no, really not now. A has something very important to share with you. We really need to talk about something else. And he just stuck on it. He's like, no, we really need to cover this right now. And I'm looking at him, not now, not now. So finally, A said, Dad, I've come to realize that I'm trans and my pronouns are she, her, and I would appreciate it if you would, respect that. And he kind of did this cartoonish double take, looked at the kids, looked at me, looked at the kids, and then without missing a beat said, thank you so much for sharing that. I love you. I respect you. I know that was difficult to share with me, and I will respect your pronouns. Has she, her ever tried marijuana?
Has she, her, and then immediately asked, has she, her ever tried marijuana?
Yeah, because he just was like stuck in this mode of this is my teen parenting crisis right now, is we got
Right.
to find out if the kids are using drugs, and like could not even process what was said. And so then A's like, okay, well, I said it. I'm out. Um,
Right.
so yes, it's a classic story in our family of just, dad's on one mission, mom's on another. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but that's how she came out. So we've both known for almost a year and a half,
Mm-hmm.
and have been very supportive, but are just kind of allowing her to let things unfold in her own time about what she wants that to look like. But she wants to be pretty transitioned socially, at least before college. She did do us another gift too of deciding that before she does anything physically, she wanted to store sperm for potential grandchildren someday.
Okay.
So, hey, at least we still have that option too, which eases a little bit of the grief about, what my child is becoming.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that part of the story. And so I think, the last part segment of this episode that we really want to talk about is just in general, you've been in straight spouse circles for a while. You've also been somebody that people have reached out to and provided support and sought support from, and that you've provided support and they've sought support from you. And so, this dichotomous sort of cognitive dissonance between having a spouse who's LGBT and a kid who's LGBT. And what would you say to other parents who are grappling with this? And and by and large, I think what we see is people do get behind their kids because they realize they want to support their children. And then they have these really complicated feelings for their spouse. And I think that gets played out sort of writ large, especially during Pride Month, where it's like you have certain
Hmm.
feelings about people being, championing your ex-spouse, like, yay, you get to be your true self, and you're stunning and brave and all that kind of stuff in Pride Month, and you're going like, really, like this whole thing blew up
Hmm.
my life. And then you have a kid who you want to like want them to feel comfortable being who they are. So can you talk to us a little bit about that experience, and then also like what you see in other straight spouses grappling with this?
Um, well, I think it's been a little difficult because um, some of my friends in straight spouse circles, they have a partner who's transitioning, which is a very, very different experience than my child.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like they're afraid a little bit now to kind of joke with me about, oh, we borrowed my scarf again. There've been times when I worry that they think now that they have to be like super appropriate or something, and not sometimes the sort of gallows humor and grief that we can have. So I've worried that it distances me a little bit.
Mm.
And then it's a little hard sometimes because I'm advocating for my child, because the more that we have LGBTQ acceptance, the fewer straight spouses there will be in the future. So I am all for Pride Month and supporting my kid if they want to go there. But at the same time, I absolutely cringe when I read the stories that always seem to come out in June about, he took until 76 to face his truth, and isn't that brave? And I just read a couple stories yesterday where somebody was talking about her father who had been secretly gay his whole life, and she was pretty sure that mom knew and mom was okay with it because mom loved him, and so they stayed together out of love. Well, I didn't leave my husband because I didn't love him. I did love him, so that's why I set him free.
Hmm.
So that's really hard because I still sort of roll my eyes and cringe at the notion of being brave at coming out later in life. But I
Mm.
do also want to make a world where it feels safer and better to come out as gay or trans earlier and feel supported and have those opportunities, so that people can live their truth earlier and not drag a bunch of extra people into the closet and put them through what we've been through. Um,
I think that's the bottom, I think that's the bottom line. Like, however you arrive at that place is like, I think the common goal, and people might differ on how we get there. And it's always been the Straight Spouse Network's goal / Our Path's goal since its founding 30 some odd years ago, that there be fewer closets and fewer closeting within heterosexual marriage. And that entails people feeling like they can live their life truthfully in accordance with how they see best and accordance with who they really feel that they are. And that's really I think the common goal, because I don't think there's anybody listening who thinks it was a great experience being in a mixed orientation marriage without their knowledge.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, the the unaware closet is
Yeah.
you know unpleasant, and so I'm glad that my child trusted me enough to come out early. I'm glad that she didn't feel like, mom can't handle one more heartbreak, so I'm just going to hide this for her. And I know she wants grandchildren, so I'll just get married and have kids and stay in the closet forever. But so I'm glad that she came out, but like, I want to take her to Pride. I want her to feel like I'm happy and joyous in who she feels she is and celebrating that. I just don't want to like run into my ex-husband there in booty shorts or something.
I mean, yeah, I'm not sure if we can end on a better comment, but I will. If there's anything else, we're close to time. I think that's like the fabulous punctuation mark. I just don't want to run into my ex-spouse in booty shorts. But is there anything else that you feel like is important to convey to straight spouses around this experience of, having these two very disparate, it is a different thing to have a spouse come out versus a child come out, and how
Yeah.
you live with the tension between those two things?
Yeah, there was a question asked once about if you have, a LGBTQ spouse and then a child comes out that way too, do you feel that your spouse won in some way? And I really recoiled at that question because I don't see it as a battle. And they just are who they are. But I realize why some people really do feel that grief because they feel that loss. Like, my spouse is not who I thought they were. My child is not who I thought they were. Can somebody just be honest with me somewhere in my life,
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I did have a little bit of that too. It's just like, okay, what next?
Right.
Is my younger child going to turn out to be gay after all?
Right. Like, what other
So,
shoe is going to fall? Yeah. And what else don't I
right,
know about the people in my life?
right. So
Yeah.
you start looking at everybody a little different. Like when my husband came out, I was certain everybody was in the closet, everybody.
Hmm.
And so now I'm kind of looking at all my kids' friends and like, where, who
Right.
are you? Which one are you going to turn out to be? It
Right.
makes you view the world in a little bit of a paranoid way, I guess. But I guess I just want to say that it is okay to be angry at your partner for the lie and for the hiding or for just not getting a clue sooner, whatever your circumstance was, the types of betrayal that can be very severe, as you know. It's okay to be angry at them and then still love your child when you find them on that path. It doesn't mean that they've been converted by your spouse, that they're influenced by them. They probably just, that's who they are. And loving them and accepting them can only help make the world a better place for everybody down the road so that there's fewer of us.
Yeah. Fewer of us. Exactly.
Yeah, the one other thing I wanted to add, and this is, maybe should have mentioned earlier, but once A came out, once again, we got these questions of, did you know? Were there
Hmm.
signs?
Hmm.
And she wanted to be the Statue of Liberty for Halloween. She's always loved all things Americana, like loves America. And so it didn't surprise me that she wanted to be the Statue of Liberty, but she referred to it as Lady Liberty. And so here I am thinking, I've done this great job of raising my kid with 70s concepts of parenting and free to be you and me that, a statue doesn't have gender. So, but I said, some kids at school might tease you a little bit. Are you ready for that? And she just said, yeah, I'll just say what's wrong? Don't you love America? You know? Don't you love freedom? And so I was like, all right, you are prepared for the world. You will be able to handle this. So she was, quote, Lady Liberty for 2 years. And I wonder if that was sort of the beginning of a female expression. But the fact that she had that immediate comeback, like, well, if they tease me, I'm just going to say, don't you love America? Like, you're going to be fine navigating the world as a trans person. You are going to be able to stand up for yourself and find your way through. Her head is screwed on straighter than most adults I know. And so that's why I don't have any question with her, that this is a phase or you're feeling pressured to identify as something. I feel like this is, you've thought about it. You would never do anything without thinking about it forever. So I think that she'll do okay in the world, and all I can do is stand behind her and support her doing that.
Well, I think we are at time, and that's a great note to end on. And I just want to thank you, Christine, for suggesting the idea for this show, and then being willing to be the guest to come on and talk about it. So that was, I think this was a great idea, and I loved our conversation, and I'm just grateful that you were willing to come on and talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of us. You could probably do a whole series.
There probably is a whole series. And,
Yeah.
we welcome people reaching out. Our email address is podcast@ourpath.org. And so and there's a form on the website if people have ideas for shows or guests for the show. I almost always forget to say that. And if we, meaning me, don't respond right away, it's because I am super busy and do have a life, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. But yeah, thanks, Christine, for coming on the show today. I'm really, really grateful.
Thank you for having me.
I want to thank our listeners for tuning in today and for making the Our Voices podcast a successful podcast with over 200,000 downloads. We celebrated that milestone a couple of weeks ago, and you continue to listen, and we are grateful. Be on the lookout for all new episodes as they drop. I'm trying to keep on a schedule of usually the first of the month. I'd like to be able to do more, but at this moment, my life is a little bit crazy, so that's just not happening. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. You can find us wherever you get yours. This is a reminder that the views of the host, yours truly, are not necessarily the views of Our Path or its board of directors. I want to thank our engineer and editor, Drew, at Play Audio Agency right here in Cincinnati, Ohio. And until next time, this is your host, Kristen, reminding you, keep using your voice.